Dear colleagues, I will now have the role of co-chair today. Welcome to the second day of our joint session. I will be speaking English in order to avoid mistakes.
Good rest after the dinner last night, and you have fully charged your batteries for today's debate. We are now coming to the fifth point on our agenda. This is the Belgrade-Pristina Dialogue, which the final objective is, as we know, to reach a comprehensive agreement on normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina, and which is one of the key conditions for Serbia's accession to the European Union. And let me remind you that the EU itself was founded on the Franco-German reconciliation, of which Robert Schuman was the architect, who was half German and half French. So we truly hope that Belgrade and Pristina will follow Schuman's idea of Franco-German reconciliation and soon reach an agreement on normalization of relations. I will speak on that point afterwards, but I would first like to give the floor to the first speaker on this agenda, and this is Mr. Ljubiša Stojmirović. Please. Molim.
Hvala lepo.
Thank you. As for the goal that has been set, it is quite okay. Full normalization of relations between Pristina and Belgrade. But what is more important now is how this goal will be attained. That depends on us, mostly. We have this not at all easy obligation to do our utmost in order to reach this goal as fast as possible. It is not realistic to believe that the attainment of this goal can take place fast. Why? Because, obviously, the views of the two sides are contradicted, and a lot needs to be done in order to reach some joint solution. Now, whose role is decisive? Neither the role of Belgrade or Pristina, but, ladies and gentlemen of the EU, your role of the EU, namely of the big powers, the United States, is there, who troubled all these waters. What it is that I don't like is, in this particular case, is that somehow, mildly put, we are pretending, or you are pretending, not to see what is visible, not to hear what is quite clear. Nobody can deny that Serbia had a lot of enthusiasm in meeting all of the preconditions put before it. Serbia attempted to put in practice this agreement between Pristina and Belgrade. But on the other hand, we see that there is no will, not at all. On the contrary, everything is being done in order to avoid the attainment of this goal. I wouldn't mind to see that Pristina in doing that, but what is disputable is that they have your support and the support of the United States to do what they are doing. Now I will tell you why I think so. What is disputable is their ban on imports of Serbian and Bosnian commodities, imports to the territory of Kosovo, but the EU and the United States did not say, don't do that. Do it properly. Put things right. Even in their statements, they stated that they have no policy. Their policy is what the United States tell them to do. On the other hand, if we look at how far your support to them is going, let me refer to two prominent examples. One is their efforts to become a part of Interpol. Is it logical A large part of the European countries are supporting them on their part to the membership in Interpol. And everybody knows, the whole world knows, including the EU members, that that is a group of people who stepped in crime. Everybody knows about the Yellow House and the crimes which they committed. Even their forerunners wrote in their books about the crimes and how they murdered Serbs. Is it normal for an Interpol member country to be a country that is recognizable as the topmost narcotics dealer? No. But I don't know why the United States or the EU are not saying it loud and clear. Those who hope to take a shortcut and become an Interpol member, they also need to know that everybody knows that they don't belong there, because everybody knows what they are doing. Secondly, their membership in UNESCO. How can you support somebody who is demolishing the UNESCO heritage? They are destroying the monasteries, the churches, the monuments, Serbian monuments from the past, from the unique monuments of historic importance. No way. On my way here, I listened to the news. Pristina and Albania agreed to create the joint strategy for their joining the EU, etc. What does that mean? It means that the benevolent approach of the big powers who have a blind eye and are not willing to see that they want to create a greater Albania. Austro-Hungarian or Empire or Austria attempted in the past to do that. So I cannot but have an impression that you do see things very clearly, but I am afraid that by closing your eyes for such things, you are supporting and helping the creation of a very difficult and unpleasant situation that will affect this region. I'm not using the term Western Balkan because I believe that that term, for some reason, has been invented. Because if you have a Western Balkans, then you have to have the Eastern, the Northern, the Southern Balkans. And this area has always been treating the Balkan Peninsula. And I don't know who and why invented this term. But most probably, there was a reason. I don't want to bore you and to speak at length, because they say the best speech is like the female skirt, the shorter the better. So I will try when it comes to the comments that I made. I hope that you will have some understanding for my objections and that together with us and representatives of Pristina, you will do your best so that in an honest and fair and quality way we can come up with a solution to problems. Thank you. Thank you. Now I will continue with this point. I sincerely hope that as soon as possible, we will be able to find a solution and to resume the dialogue after the Kosovo elections. I believe that now there is perhaps a new atmosphere, hopefully. You know that normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina is one of the main conditions for accession of Serbia to the EU. So it is very important for this process to be resumed. Of course, we are very much disappointed because no progress has been made and that the entire process is now blocked. The first priority, of course, is to resume the dialogue and for both sides to find a new window of opportunity in order to find some legally binding agreement in line with the international law, and so that the normalization can happen. For us and for me, of course, the status quo is not tolerable. It is not good for any of the sides, neither of the two sides. We discussed it yesterday and this morning as well with your President of Serbia. What was interesting to hear yesterday was when we discussed it with the NGOs and civil society. They told us that any solution will finally be adopted but the path to the solution is difficult. And this has again become the #1 issue, but there is a fatigue in the Serbian society when it comes to this particular topic. The President told us this morning that that is so. So it is very important to continue with the dialogue. And the next step, what will the next step be? We are now undergoing the process of appointing the new European Commission. We have the new head of the foreign policy, Josep Borrell. But first of all, we need a new government to be set in Kosovo after the elections that took place in early October. And as we reiterated on several occasions in the Parliament in Brussels and in Strasbourg, they need to abolish the tariffs first. That is the well-known positions that we have. So some atmosphere needs to be created for the negotiations to be resumed, not only when it comes to these taxes or tariffs, customs tariffs. Of course, Serbia has a responsibility there when it comes to preserving this atmosphere for the dialogue to be resumed as soon as possible. More or less, that would be all that I can say when it comes to this particular point. Yes, please. Mrs. Fajon, I am a full university professor and I deal with the topic of management. You have an axiom there that says there can be no successful job done unless all the parties are pleased. Willy-nilly, that will be the case here too. You say that Serbia is equally responsible as Kosovo. Well, that is not the case because we met everything that was required from us under the Brussels Agreement, and we are trying to be fair. You said, well, now they have completed their election, so it will be better. How come it will be better if they are not recognizing the Serbian list that is to be given a certain number of mandates? According to their constitution, one representative from that list should be a minister, but they are now looking for excuses so as to eliminate a member of the Serbian list. On the other hand, you saw this circus with counting the votes. Well, poisonous ballots, poisonous only for members of Kosovo Albanians and not others. I know that you are not creating the policy of the EU. You are only implementing it. You are trying to solve the problems, but the policy makers should be tougher and tell them, well, stop playing. You need to act in line with the law and the right and the justice. Thank you.
I do not agree that we do not create European policies. I think that we contribute to the creation of European policies in Parliament very much like you do here. So I'll give the floor to the next speaker, to Mr. Milorad Mijatovic. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I believe that yesterday Mr. Orlic said in his keynote speech, he presented Serbia's position related to negotiations between Belgrade and Pristina. My colleague also reminded of the positions of our country, I will just underline a few things. First of all, I should like to say we are very much concerned over the messages coming from Pristina after the elections. They keep stressing that they should re-examine everything that has been achieved so far within the Brussels agreement. Let me stress right away, Serbia strictly honored the Brussels agreement. It did many things. It accepted many things, which was frequently met with great dissatisfaction within the country, all with a desire to conduct a dialogue in order to arrive at a specific concrete solution. As we have stressed, and this is what we expect of the international community, is a stricter reaction on their part to their messages coming from Pristina. I think we can expect this from you with every reason and justification. As the colleague said, the counting of votes and all these games, do you think anybody normal could actually swallow that? In the international community or in Serbia? In 2019, Serbia is a different Serbia. It's not that Serbia that it used to be. This very fact should be taken into account, and because of that very fact, the international community, of course, including the EU, should actually prevent such games from being played. It is poisoning of the children. This was a long time ago. Then the poisoning of the miners in the Trepča mine, etc. I think that now enough is enough. Serbia has a greater interest in arriving at this comprehensive binding agreement. Why? Because it is our strategic aim to join the European Union, and we have Chapter 35. Chapter 35 can always block us on that path. The very fact that we are looking for a solution is proof enough that we do want to join the European Union, that is our strategic objective. And there we expect you to help us. As I said at the very beginning, we have invested very much in the Brussels agreement, the judiciary, the energy sector, telecommunications, what have you. So Serbia has made a lot of concessions there. And in return, we just ask for one most important thing for us, which is the community of Serbian municipalities. There is none, not even in the offing. There is constant obstruction on that score. One step forward, two steps back, and then legal ruses are being employed to the effect there is no room for such a creation there, etc., etc. And we are hard hit also by the fact that our officials are unable to officially visit Kosovo, because when they deem appropriate, the Kosovars forbid them entry into the territory of Kosovo. And you can imagine how the Serbs who live there feel because of that. So they cannot have any relations with their own country. Someone can block the entry of anyone, sports teams and the officials of our country. So are we living in Europe, where in the European Union we have open borders, or do there exist countries where this is impossible to carry out? We are, of course, all for joining the European Union, for being without boundaries. We have created this small Schengen, and we know how much that means in economic terms, the trading and circulation of people, and how we can overcome such problems, whereas our own people cannot visit our own territory. I often travel to Novi Sad, and I can tell you I see lots of cars, lots of buses, with license plates from Kosovo, and nobody is preventing them from entering Serbia, and we are prevented from entering a part of Serbia. I believe that finally the international community will stop with these double standards and will tell to both sides what is in keeping with the rules of the game and with law and legal norms and standards of the European community and that of Serbia. Thank you. Thank you. I see that Mr. Šolmes is not in the room. And the next speaker is Mr. Rističević. Thank you. As Professor Stojmirović quoted partly the Prime Minister of England, I shall quote the former President of the U.S. He says, this is Kennedy, he says, victory has 1,000 fathers and defeat is an orphan. This orphan is what Serbia has come to be, what it is experiencing. The great powers always think that here they can do their thing without us. The great powers will never recognize their mistake, even when they commit it, and if they admit to it, for them to admit it, it requires some time. Also, the Balkan nations should know that the reckonings of the great were always at the expense of the small ones. Not always Serbs, mind you. Other nations have suffered here, too. So that I do not think that the Albanians are bad people. No, of course not. This is a very young nation. It is, however, a fact that they are the second people in terms of their numbers in the Balkans. It is also a fact that this defeat, this orphan, came into being by our country being bombed in order to establish the human rights of all the inhabitants of Kosovo and Metohija. That didn't happen, and that is why problems are multiplying. That didn't happen because tens and scores and tens of hundreds of thousands of of the population were expelled during the mandate of the great powers. The great powers actually put this part of territory under their tutelage as a protectorate, but during that time, the false state of Kosovo and Metohija was created. It is not only Serbia that says that this is a false state. It's also the Slovak Republic, Cyprus, Spain, and Romania that say so. I am in favor of compromise. Believe me, the Albanians cannot stand the Serbs. Albanians are living in the Kosovo and Metohija are against Serbs. The results show that. The results of the Serbian ballot list show this. This is not just one party. This is a collection of parties which believes that Kosovo is the state of Serbia. The results show that Serbs cannot stand the Albanians actually ruling them. So they are living pitted against each other as they live there together in Kosovo. So if we want to honor the positions of the Slovak Republic, Cyprus, Romania, Spain, etc., we have to make a delineation where the boundaries of Serbia were prior to the NATO aggression. I am in favor of a compromise. The European Union says that it is against such delimitation, but these two nations have to be delimited. The question is at which line and when. There's certain intolerance which is also shown towards not only Serbs, Serbian commodities too. So this hatred is something that one can measure. And as Tesla said, Mr. Stojmirović, if you were to transform that hatred into energy, you could shine all over it on the whole world. So illuminate the whole world. You cannot find solutions at the expense of small peoples. It is very hard for these two nations to reconcile. I believe that we could have good relations between these two most numerous peoples in the Balkans if this delimitation was carried out. We need peace and we need investments. Our country or any state without investment, without economic progress, this is a car without fuel, without electric power, without any driving powers. This car can only go downhill. We realize that. Whether the Albanians have realized that, I'm not quite sure, but we cannot explain to our people or to any thinking person how come that all the former republics could have seceded from the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and in Serbia, its province seceded. And now in the West, they say Serbia cannot delimit itself from its own province. This is hard to understand. You have to realize that these people have to be delimited. There has to be this delimitation because these people are living, as I said, against each other. Of course, borders change. You mentioned the Habsburg Empire. Borders change. It might happen that one day there will be reconciliation between the Serbs and the Albans. They might agree and live in a sort of federal state. Maybe the European Union will reconcile Serbs and Albanians one day. I would like that to happen as soon as possible. But believe me, this is peasant logic. If two peasants cannot agree about the boundary line between their fields, they can only agree after a surveyor comes and tells them exactly where the milestones are, and then they make peace among each other. Thank you. Thank you. We have one speaker who wishes to take the floor. Perhaps somebody else also wants to speak. Alexandra? No, sorry. It is you first. I apologize to you, but the media representatives kept me longer outside the conference room than I had planned. Well, you know, probably my colleagues have already said some things. That for us is the question of paramount importance and the most important. It should be the most important question for all, including the European Union. When we talk about integration of the Western Balkans into the EU, it is, of course, quite logical. It is only normal. We should not at all criticize the EU on that score or voice any doubts, because the European Union wants primarily a stable region, and it wants a stable region to become a member of the European Union. But for that, the European Union has to exert an effort. After the Serbs and the Albanians, it is the European Union that should exert the most effort for that issue to be resolved. Serb-Albania relations are the most important, not only for the stability of this part of Europe and Southeast Europe and Balkans. Of course, we can add Turkey as well, but Turkey is more on Asian territory than in Europe. So these are the two biggest nations in the Western Balkans. They will continue to do in the decades to come, according to all statistical data. Ipso facto, that implies two biggest markets, largest markets, and the European Union is hence also interested on that score in this region. It is most important on the basis of everything that we went through in the 90s. Unfortunately, I am not really lamenting over the demise of the Habsburg Empire, of course, even though my ancestors lived there because I hail from Bosnia. But I do believe that Yugoslavia did have a good prospect as a country, whereas it no longer exists. Had that country survived, had we been wise enough to reconstructed democratically already in the early 70s or perhaps early 80s. Had we had European integrations on the agenda, perhaps Yugoslavia would now be one of the most economically strong and stable countries in the European Union and Europe, generally speaking. I'm quite sure of that. A strong market of almost 30 million souls. As things stand now, we are torn into 6 states, and we are all the weaker for that as individual states. But that's the situation. What can we do? I have to say that, simply speaking, it is a great disillusionment for the citizens, and everybody must realize that, how much it means that even more than half of the Serb people, citizens, are now in favor of integrations, whereas for a year now we have been subjected to terror and uncivilized action, and which is, of course, contrary to the SAA, which Kosovo has signed with the European Union. That is no question about it. The imposition of tariffs, that it is contradictory in contravention of the CEFTA agreement, that is, of course, a matter of common knowledge. This is not normal, what has been done. We have been subjected to it for a year now. Now, the European Union, as the mediator, does not manage, as this goes on, this whole process, to force them to lift those tariffs. They actually are in breach of a contract they have with you. What is the punishment? What are the sanctions? What are the consequences of their breaching a contract with you? Did their investments go down? No. Or donations? Did you perhaps abolish the projects, the ongoing projects with Kosovo? This is what our citizens are thinking about. All these is on their mind. And still, over 50% of Serbia's citizens still wish to join the EU. And still you have a government whose strategic objective is membership of the European Union. Sometimes I wonder what kind of Serbs are we towards our own selves. And I am in favor of European integration. I am, and this is a rare occasion in the Serbian parliament. I'm an overtly pro-Western MP. I was given this look by the lady colleague. Yes. On the other hand, what about the community of Serb municipalities? This was something that was signed in the presence of members, representatives of the European Commission. Representatives of Pristina signed that. What about that community? Do you ever ask them about that? I'm asking you, who are in our joint parliamentary committee. I beg of you, I kindly ask you, when you go back to Strasbourg or to Brussels, please convey to colleagues, if you have a like committee with Pristina, I'm not sure that one exists, but you do have a rapporteur from Pristina, please be so kind as to press it upon that colleague that Pristina should honor the Brussels Agreement and the community of Serbian municipalities, and that we can see it and that we can show it to our citizens. Madam Tanja Fajon, that Madam Fajon and other colleagues ask for the creation of the community of Serbian municipalities as in the agreement which was signed. It was signed and you were there. So you were present at the signature of this agreement. All this is very important because of the messages that we are addressing to the citizens of Serbia. As I'm not going to ask for the floor again, I will say something about the perception of Serbian citizens as to joining the EU. Please, I fail to understand. If the lady minister yesterday said that at this time, at this moment, we are technically prepared, and you know that, and we are prepared, and you know that, to open 4 chapters at this moment. Why not open all chapters? Why open 1 or 2? because the opening of chapters in itself signifies faster, more dedicated, better work in those specific areas with the purpose of European integration and alignment with European standards in those areas. When you will close those chapters, that is up to you. You will assess whether we are prepared or not for the closing of chapters, whether we have achieved all that is necessary. But why not open? The slower you open these chapters, the slower is the transformation of Serbia. Please give us a chance to transform, to change. If we are not asking for somebody else, some others who who joined the union in a much easier way, don't respond about the measurements and what we have done, etc. Please open all chapters and then measure and gauge us and calibrate us and criticize us, assist us for each individual chapter. But please do open all the chapters that we are prepared for. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. Since we do not have time for all speakers, I have two more speakers. One is our colleague Alexandra and then Mr. Jovanovic. If you can finish in 2 minutes each, please. Dear co-chair, Mr. Orlic, fellow MPs, this topic since 2012 started this cooperation with the EU, and it resulted with the Brussels Agreement, which we all agree was not respected as an international agreement. On the Serbian side, everything was done, and the political baby of the big powers under the name of Kosovo seems to be a disobedient baby. But I don't believe this to be a possibility. States wishing to become states and lacking capacity and political basis for it cannot exist. I mean, these states cannot afford, wannabe states cannot afford to be disobedient. They follow instructions. The nervosity of Albanians after 7 years is increasing. The idea that they've done the job, they finished the job, is not there, because they see they're losing grounds. The number of countries who are withdrawing the recognition of the so-called state of Kosovo, now 15 states withdrew their recognition, and also in international organizations they cannot get the majority to be accepted and recognized, so then they go for a different marketing campaign. They talk about 20,000 raped women. Now we have the anthrax, which is existing only on Serbian ballot papers, and so on. This is really old hat in 2019. People don't buy it anymore. But whenever their edginess, nervosity grows, Serbs living there have a big problem. Their freedom of movement is restricted, forbidden. They're exposed to violence and terror, which really is the behavior which is usually labeled as terrorism in the world. And when we talked about the media, nobody mentioned yesterday that journalists working for Serbian media are not only just beaten up, they end up assassinated. Nobody mentions that. Under the motto of the fight against corruption, people are arrested left, right, and center in order to spread fears and instigate people to leave the territory of Kosovo and Metohija. The impression is gained that people in the West close their eyes to the Albanian behavior. There are no reactions, which gives them further enthusiasm to continue with this kind of behavior. And then one can ask how much really the Union wishes the Brussels Agreement to be implemented, the justice and the law. And now we have, it's ridiculous, this sort of 1 year of taxes which were implemented against and international agreements. The taxes blocked the dialogue. We need the taxes removed in order to see the continuations of the dialogue. We need to have all court cases in place against all the UCK which are politically active. The court should do its business. It affects the Prime Minister, President there, because, I'm sorry, we have the resolution of the Council of Europe where it was proven in 2011 by Dick Marty that there are absolutely unquestionable basis to start court proceedings, judicial proceedings for genocide and murder. And also, elections in Kosovo and Metohija should be recognized. Serbian list got 10 MPs, and Albanian side should accept Serbian list as the relevant political collocutor with whom they have to negotiate about one portfolio in Kosovo government as the law prescribes there. So these are three important elements without which we are not going to see the continuation or the new dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. And we think that your role there is a key role to bring this dialogue back on track and bring both sides to the table. IMF reporting on Kosovo economy. We and our fellow MPs in Kosovo every year hear IMF's report on their economy. Kosovo is living from contributions from abroad. The economy is such that 60% of young people are unemployed. Unemployment is more than 33% overall. The growth of the economy does not exist. So their goal of sort of having this state and the economy as they have it is to use financial transfers. We know that the basis is mostly criminal. They use that to establish a state organization. So the reality in Kosovo have to fight for their position, their status. If Serbs do not get the status, then European Union becomes enters into a collusion with carrying out this type of policy in Kosovo. I don't think this is the case. EU is changing its policy, EU is reforming itself, moving towards the future, and the EU will not accept this framework, this concept which Albanian party is trying to impose on you, the rest of the world, and Serbia. Thank you, Mr. Jovanovic. Thank you, Mrs. Fajon, Mr. Orlic, dear colleagues, dear fellow MEPs. It's unquestionable that we have to share one thought, reflection. No nation must be held hostage to the bad decisions of its government. The hostage of the law, bad decisions and omissions and mistakes is people in Kosovo and Metohija, because Brussels agreement is not implemented and human rights are really breached, a flagrant breach that we witness. The problem is that the EU has to appear on the scene and act as somebody to present a different factor to what it was now. Not to look at Serbia as the sole culprit and to look at Kosovo as the victim in the whole story. None of the two is true. None of the two standing. What Mr. Rističević said is absolutely true. No people should be labeled as bad people, including people in Kosovo, Albanians as well. But the mantra has to stop, and we'll hear this mantra for a very long time. And the mantra is that in Serbia, one always tries to find those who put brakes on the implementation of the agreement on the status of now interim institutions in Kosovo. Therefore, I beg and propose that EU takes a different stance, namely to remove the skepticism now present among the Serbs regarding the genuine wish to protect the interests of Serbian population in Kosovo. Serbs are very skeptical, doubtful for many reasons. First, the EU, as it acts, I mean, if the Serbs did what Kosovo government did, Serbia would have sanctions imposed on Serbia. I do not wish Kosovo to be put under sanctions because ordinary people would suffer that and not the elite that represent Albanians. We know what sanctions are like and what they look like. We live the sanctions. I do not wish sanctions upon us. I don't wish them upon anybody else. But the Union has to take a different stance, different point regarding basic human rights. We talked yesterday about the independence of the judiciary. I said that we did undertake considerable steps there in Serbia. I asked the Union to look whether anything regarding the independence of judiciary is carried out in Kosovo. Did anybody who was in the breach of human rights of Serbs in Kosovo was brought before the justice? Anybody who exceeded their powers and authorities, be it in the security or any other part of the government? None was brought. Serbian people didn't see any such case. We do have great expectations of the special courts in Kosovo, which was set up for the crimes against Serbs and other non-Albanians in Kosovo. We'll have to bring answers to these questions. That's why Serbs are quite doubtful because of the experience we had until now. Nothing was done regarding the trade in human organs, and the facts are there, unquestionable. What was done? Who was brought to justice? Any single criminal procedure? Any prosecution? Any final judgment? No. So please, Mrs. Fajon, with the authority that you have, please influence the colleagues, because these issues are ipso facto and de jure ipso jure correct. Stand. Please help Europe to carry on, so to make just decisions and implement them. Thank you. Now, I think we came to the end of this point. We move to point 6. Enlargement perspectives. I know that the first speaker on the European Parliament side is Mr. Franz Bogovic, and Ondor Deli has to leave at 11:30. If we can make a switch and Deli can start, yes? Thank you. Thank you. When we talk about the institutional reforms, which is the context, the framework, what we discussed yesterday and is related to the enlargement, this is a topic, reform and enlargement, reform of the Union and enlargement, which were linked together by the French president when he said that the Union should reform itself first, complete the internal restructuring, and then to undertake further enlargements. what is missing there in the whole situation is that for the real, genuine reform, you have to change, adapt the foundation international contracts that make up the foundation of the European Union. And as far as I can tell, there is no political will to change the basic political documents of the Union after the Lisbon International Treaty, which came into force 10 years ago. Nobody dealt with the essence of the basic treaties. Before that, every 5 or 6 years, basic treaties of the Union were amended regularly. In the last 10 years, nothing happened. So if you look at the fact that there is no appetite to tackle the amendments of the fundamental treaties, which would lead to institutional reforms, if you link this with the enlargement fatigue, you are in a deadlock. And one could wonder what is the way out, how to square this circle. But what is unquestionable is that this waiting time in the anteroom of the Union should be made both economically and politically most useful. The SAA agreement as an instrument is now old-fashioned, obsolete. SAA was an instrument that was used in this first big wave of enlargement towards the east by the Union, and is a basic type of contract on free trade agreement with some political elements thrown in for good measure. But when we look at candidates like Serbia and Montenegro, which are far advanced in their efforts, in their work on the enlargement path, integration path, I think it's not natural for the Union with such countries to have the same ways of dealing, the same levels of dealing as with any other second or third country around the bloc. The Union has a free trade agreements with Canada. There is free trade agreement being drafted in Mercosur, free trade agreement with Japan. So I think it's quite unnatural to treat in the same way the candidates for membership, advanced candidates, and the third countries which can be at the other end of the globe. And the proof in point is the story we heard yesterday, the steel plant in Smederevo here in Serbia. What is obvious is that because of the SAA, agreement in a way, and the non-existence of, shall I call it, preferential treatment of the candidate countries who have signed the SAA are actually in a disadvantage in comparison to third countries which have only signed the free trade agreements with the Union. For unlike Canada, like Serbia, for instance, cannot give state subsidies in such situations. I'm just giving this as an example that while we wait for something to happen with the enlargement, I think the Union should ask itself first, how the SAA can or could be turned into something else, into something bigger, stronger, higher level of document to make a palpable difference between the candidateship and a third country with which European Union just have a free trade agreement. If we look at short-term, long-term priorities, I think this is something which is definitely a very much short-term priority for Brussels, and I think the next Commission should really look very seriously into this topic.
Excuse me. We have a small discussion relating to the amendments, but it will be okay. Mr. Bogovic. Thank you, Chair. Andrei has already started this topic. We all know that in the European Union there were elections. We know what the outcome was. The European Parliament is a bit more divided now. The two main groups that are represented here no longer have a majority. The coalition is being created now with the former liberals. Now we are hoping that the renewal will be successful. Also, we have some problems in the stage of the creation of the Commission. What should be started on the 1st of November will most probably start on the 1st of December. And we are not yet sure who will be in charge of enlargement, whether it will be a Hungarian or not. Maybe it will be a Frenchman. Well, I believe that the French will have their own demands. Then Romania and Bulgaria and Hungary are also there. The Brexit is now prolonged as well. Now we have the issue of the commissioner from the UK. Hopefully after the 1st of November, when we return, we will have a clear picture. At this time, the Parliament has already been formatted. All the working groups are established. And what has already happened, as we mentioned here, the decision of the summit that of a few days ago in the European Parliament was clearly reflected last week. That was called a big mistake, but hopefully in the coming months the European Parliament will send some better signals. When it comes to the opening of chapters, whenever we have a discussion and whenever we debate it in the Parliament, we have the same position that more chapters should be open. In my country, it took 6 years from the beginning to the end, and I know that is not that simple to keep the pace, because things change over time. When we take into consideration the global picture, since the year 2004 or 2007 or 2013, many changes took place during the time of enlargement and after it. And over the past 3 years with the Brexit, Europe was shaken. We had these internal issues, but even that is logical. But I believe that that has a too big an impact on the European scene or inside some states. There are elections taking place somewhere all the time. So this decision that was adopted 10 years ago also in the eve of the French elections did affect and disturb the process. As for the enlargement, We know that when Mr. Juncker mentioned that there was no to be enlargement during the 5 years of his term in the parliament, my understanding was that hardly would it be possible for that to happen, the enlargement to happen. But that does not mean that we should not speed up the procedure in order to come to the point that at the beginning of every period of 5 years, the same situation will happen. Well, because of these internal issues that have to do with migration and some other developments and the crime that is present in some of the countries, people from various parts of Europe participate in some crime groups in the West. If I could understand it from what I could hear when we were wondering what was happening and why this decision was taken. I can say that last Wednesday within the EPP group, we had a very constructive meeting with Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen. We were sitting between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. Mr. Hahn, Commissioner Khan was there. David McAllister was also there. David McAllister led the group of us MEPs who are interested in the enlargement, and we know who should be included in the enlargement. Well, we still call it Western Balkan. I can say that Mrs. von der Leyen listened more than Mr. Juncker, who was never present in our group. So that was a good signal. But it is not easy to understand this part of Europe. There are a few people in the European Parliament who really understand what is happening here, and that is the problem, together with the migration crisis. So this part of Europe was put in the agenda because it was shown that we are interdependent. Within the dialogue that took place, Mr. Hahn made a positive assessment. There are problems, for sure. Then how operational the European Union can be in order to make a pressure, but he stated that some more specific assistance to this part of Europe is required. Specific finances are required. 1.2 billion or 230 euros per capita in Serbia were allocated, and in Poland it was 38 million, more than 2,000 euros per capita. So these are big differences. Talking about opening of these chapters, they are demanding chapters like the environmental protection, energy. As I try to understand all these topics, we need to see how we can improve our cooperation and our specific aid based on the Paris Agreement. So we can come to the issues of environment and energy. In Europe, we have a special fund for the regions that have coal and thermal power plants. The Germans, the Polish are there. About 5 billion should be allocated to these regions. But once the chapters are open, and when we talk about the transformation and meeting of some criteria at this level, these will be major investments that will be required. To the best of our ability, I will try to contribute to the opening of these chapters. Many countries have a problem when it comes to using this money, because we must not wonder at the end where this money end up. It all depends on the capacities of particular states. On the other hand, we need to find some solutions. We need to make some specific signals through some specific assistance so that this part of Europe can be adjusted to the conditions better, those that will attend all these procedures. I believe that what we are doing is important, even though these debates are sometimes not simple in the parliament or elsewhere. But according to my experience, and in the past, I was also a member of the delegation for Turkey. It was really challenging to be a part of two delegations for countries which I believe will come closer to the EU. With Turkey, there was no dialogue. But there is no reason for us to give up. I believe that we need to work harder in order to be heard. We need to get to know each other better and to understand each other better. My position has always been that if the capacity of the European Union in the past years to enlarge to 250 million, there is no reason why we should not continue with the enlargement so as to have 440 million or more. In the first wave, I believe it will be realistic for Serbia and Montenegro to be included. That's 7.5 million. And then there would be 10 more million left in this part of Europe. Thank you. Colleague Franz. Our next speaker is Mrs. Tomic. Thank you. Madam Co-Chair, Mr. Ulrich, colleague MPs, we have reached the conclusion that when we last met in this format, when we talk about our SAPs, when we talk about SSA, which is our point of departure for this cooperation as a document. In the European Parliament, you had elections, so this last meeting seems to be very far in the past. Now you have a new president. There's a new concept of enlargement, which is all indicated by the decision that took place on Friday. But I'm happy that Mrs. Mogherini organized this meeting 2 days ago or 2 nights ago for heads of the Western Balkan states. It is indicative of the fact that we are moving forward as a country, Serbia as countries, and Serbia is in particular. The path of Serbia is difficult, and on that path you are changing and we are changing. You have problems relating to your relations with the UK. Then the number of MEPs was reduced to 705. You have internal consolidation and renewal, covering the areas from consolidations to the economic recovery of the member states, enhancement of the political impact. You defined your strategic agenda to the year 2024. We know that 17 chapters out of 35 with Serbia have been open for our waiting. Now that we are waiting for your enlargement policy, you say that you are focusing on the Western Balkan. Peace and stability, in your view, are important in the region and the implementation of reforms. Serbia has done a lot. Serbia has shown that it pursued an active policy when it comes to the economic reforms. And with the help of economic reforms and fiscal consolidation, Serbia has carried out an institutional renewal. We can say that. And all financial reports filed by the IMF and the World Bank are indicative of that. Now that you have a new composition, the investments in Serbia amounted to 3.5 billion last year, and this year more than 2.5 billion for the first 6 months of this year. According to Financial Times, we are the #1 countries when it comes to attracting the interest of investors, when it comes to greenfield investments. And to cope with such a title, to be forerunner, when the EU and developed countries are taken into consideration as well. The area, the demography are also taken into consideration, but also the indicators of changes in our legislative framework and how far we are in economic reforms, how foreseeable the business environment is for the investors. Well, having all that in mind, I wonder how come when we talk about the rule of law and democratic freedoms that they are not present enough. If the investments are interested in coming here, in particular private companies from the most developed countries of the EU, these two things are somehow in collision. That is why we say that we have done a lot when it comes to economic reforms. Now we have high growth rates, 4.4% for last year. Then we have the low inflation rate. We have growth indicative of the fact that we are capable of increasing salaries and pensions. The employment went down 26% compared to 2016. We have shown that we have these chapters where the Ministry of Finance is responsible for them. 7, 19, 29, and 33 are the leading chapters relating to finances. We have a part relating to the measures relating to the closure of these chapters. We have defined them together. The bodies for implemented SAA, the committee, has one of the 7 subcommittees relating to the implementation of SSA. The co-chair is the State Secretary of the Ministry of Finance. And it is important to mention that the last session was on the 24th of October in Belgrade, and the main topics indicative of the future are economic cooperation. The reform of public finance was launched by the government decision in November 2015. Since 2016, we are actively working towards changing this document that the government adopts once in 6 months. It is submitted to European Commission. The European Commission publicizes it as an important document. The Parliament actively participates in this process. The chair of the Committee for Finance and myself as a member of this committee, together with the Ministry of Finance, the public audit institution, we submit the report on our work, namely the action plan adopted by the government. The measure 1819 is related to the Parliament. Those are our external supervision of public finance. The Committee for Finance has the duty to scrutinize all reports of the state audit institution, and because of this external activity and supervision, we have our sessions outside of the Parliament. We visit local self-governments, and their reports are discussed, and the reports of state audit institution on them. We will travel to Čačak now. The number was growing every year. External supervision is conducted, external audit. We have up to 4 in 1 year, and we can be proud of the fact that these reports have been approved by the European Commission. In that connection, my colleague Arsic and myself, he's also a member of the Committee for Finance and the former chair, we have filed an amendment. I see that it has been adopted. The economic reforms can be commended when it comes to structural reforms. We provided an amendment to the economic reforms for the period 2019 to 21. So we have done a lot. And what is encouraging for me as an MP is that when we talk about the economic reforms, those that are related to the state aid, on the one hand, it is maybe different than ours. Our solution is the Minister of Finance proposed a new law. It was adopted in the Parliament, and now the Commission for the State Aid will be transferred. So we are doing a lot when it comes to the reforms. We have reforms relating to the protection of human rights, democracy, and when we talk about the law on the fight against corruption that has been adopted and the new law on the anti-corruption agency, there's the new law adopted on lobbying, which was really in a lengthy procedure. Mr. Juncker made a statement this morning. He said that he was satisfied with the dinner of the 2 nights ago, because what Mr. Vučić said is what we keep talking for a year already, that nothing is new, that there is just a skepticism in the EU when it comes to enlargement to the Western Balkans. You are changing your views, your concept for some time, for some future time. You have changed the majority, parliamentary majority, and you will be changing the concept itself. What he said this morning, that there is an idea of on economic cooperation with Western Balkans as the region with the EU, that is a step out of the box which you can take as the EU now when it comes to the Western Balkans countries. We as Serbia favor that because we can now be proud of the good economic result. So this relationship between us and what you said, what Mr. Deli also mentioned, that perhaps we should redefine the way of how SSA should look like. Maybe that should be one of your initiatives for the future. And maybe you can say that with all the difficult efforts exerted, we managed to comply with SAA. In each part of it, that was difficult for the citizens of Serbia to accept. Many parts of SAA perhaps were not such that our people were ready for it, but as a responsible authority and the state, we made a lot of efforts to work with the citizen to get them used to new models, not only of doing business, but of living in Serbia. And we were telling them what our future life, once we become an EU members, will be like. This Euroscepticism that exists perhaps in a part of the Serbian public, it is justified, because when you take a look of your decisions, they are showing a different picture and sending a different message. But what we could hear from you today, especially when it comes to the economic cooperation for the future for us, that is acceptable as your present possibility. Because obviously you have problems, you have issues that you need to solve by consensus. And you are about to undergo changes. We have changed a lot, and there are still changes ahead of us, but we will have to work together to solve our problems.
Gospođa Tomić.
Thank you, Ms. Tomić. The floor goes to Ms. Kovač. Madam Kovač. Thank you. Distinguished Madam Chair, distinguished fellow MPs, when we talk about the prospects for enlargement, things are quite, how shall I say, vague and different. When we think about the fact that not so long ago, for instance, after your elections, immediately after the setting up of Parliament, we were in Brussels visiting Andor, and then we talked about whether we shall at all have within the new European Commission a commissioner, whether there will be a portfolio designated to enlargement specifically. So when we proceed from that, this was a topic in July, and now it is October, and that this portfolio, the way I read it, has been a bit promoted. It is a policy on enlargement and good neighborliness. The question is now who will be the commissioner, whether this decision will finally be made. It is quite clear, of course, to all of us that it is up to politicians. As far as I know, the Hungarian and the French candidates have passed the muster, as it were, and of course we have to see what happens to the Romanian and the UK candidates. We do hope that shortly we shall indeed have a commission and a much clearer situation. Of course, as a candidate country, as someone who is, as the minister says, deeply in negotiations, we have to have that in mind. We heard references to enlargement fatigue. I would perhaps stand still in enlargement. The Montenegro also opened 22 chapters, I believe, but they're not much more successful because they only closed 3, and we opened 17 and closed only 2. So as we discussed, this is not some pace to be proud of, and of course, technically, we are prepared. We were prepared technically for the closing of 5 chapters, have been for some time now, and now technically prepared for another 4, and hope that something will happen at the end of December, but nobody has the crystal ball to see what will happen in the future. Yesterday, we also talked about another matter. Madam von der Leyen has said in one of her first addresses to the European Parliament that there can be whole Europe without the Western Balkans, which is good, of course, but this is nothing new. She said that in her capacity of new president, but when we discuss generally the situation, the 2 biggest countries, Germany had always had a firm position of support towards enlargement. On the other hand, France, no, it didn't have such a position, and won't have such a position until Emmanuel Macron is in power, and he has stated as much. That there will be no new members until there is an internal reform of the European Union. We have heard that. And Mr. Macron, however, was in Serbia in July, and on that occasion he did say that it was possible to have 2 parallel tracks, one the reform of the Union itself, on the other to continue negotiations on the enlargement process, which is a good message, which in fact did happen when other, so to say, Eastern countries joined the European Union. At that time, there were also internal reforms, and negotiations were held in parallel with these Eastern European countries, which managed to join. Mr. Bokovic referred to the experience of his country. I try to draw a parallel here. From the acquisition of the status of candidate to full-fledged membership, how much time is required? It took Slovenia some 7 years and Croatia some 9 years, according to some calculations of mine, and these are neighboring countries. It is quite clear that it will take Serbia much longer. Last year, when we talked about 2025, after the strategy was published, that was the year which was bandied about. Now nobody's talking about 2025. It is quite clear that it will take Serbia much more from its acquisition of candidate status, which was long ago, in 2012. Of course, we're all aware of the changing circumstances, but still we need some impetus. It is quite clear also that there is citizen fatigue and that this is a very, very lengthy process, has been, and complicated, and perhaps not understandable to them. What I want to stress is that we have to work together in order to communicate the advantages to them even more intensively. When you see the example of North Macedonia, which has really done everything, which has been promised for decades and for especially in the last periods, things, but then it all of a sudden it was no. So when you talk about political factors, the radical right-wing, all that is taken into consideration, but we all agree that this is a disastrous decision and dangerous for all of us. And we can also draw a parallel with Serbia there, because simply, in my view, the European Union has lost some of its credibility after that decision, and it is difficult to talk about enlargement after that decision. We are all wondering what can happen to us. I personally believe that this technical process regarding the opening of chapters will continue. It has to continue. It is another question how successfully we shall be able to close those chapters. If we continue at this pace, it will take us another 4 or 5 years just for the opening of the chapters. And then what about the closing of the chapters? It will require a minimum of 2 years. And then for the ratification of the accession treaty agreement, and then approval of all the member states, so that it is very difficult to convey and explain to the public of Serbia where is that light at the end of the tunnel. So that this explains the position of the citizens of Serbia towards EU membership, because people want to see the benefits of that membership as soon as possible. I agree about the IPA and economic cooperation. This needs to be strengthened at all levels, because the concrete benefits will actually keep the support to EU membership at over 50%, at least 55%, irrespective of all these problems. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Kovac. Now, the floor goes to Vladimir Đurić. Vesna Marjanović is not here. Thank you. Well, it is true that people want to see the benefits of European integrations as soon as possible. If the benefits are postponed, then we shall have 2 tiers of Euroscepticism. The first one, we say, yes, this is all great and brilliant, but nothing doing. That is one level. The second level, Euroscepticism will be, is that really good? In fact, so this is a different realm, as it were. The process of European integration has been proclaimed as the principal foreign policy objective of Serbia, and very often the question is raised, should it have an alternative, and can we in parallel pursue that path and another path? And this question is, as a rule, topical either when the Brussels benchmarks and tasks seem unfair to us, when we think that they are being changed all the time, or when the internal resistances to reforms intensify and to the efforts to modernize the state. And also in question is called this is called in question when we refer to the readiness of the European Union to enlarge, and within that enlargement admit us as members. So this is something which is very topical nowadays when we test the readiness of Europe to open this door to us. The issue which is raised, first of all, is that of the French position, which is being interpreted, and as is the statement of President Macron in that context. And I should like to read or convey something which I read today, rather. I wish to welcome the statement of Mr. Jean-Louis Falcone's the ambassador of France, which I read today at the portal European Western Balkans, namely that France does not have a veto of any kind or any privileged partnership with Serbia as an objective, but exclusively the full membership of the Western Balkans in the European Union. And he explained this as France's idea to modernize the process process where the candidates would meet the criteria in specific fields, and they could then use all the benefits fully without having to wait for the end of the entire complex process and all the negotiating chapters and all the social reforms to have been undertaken as envisaged in those chapters. In practice, that means in the area where everything has been achieved, the candidate will be eligible for all the benefits without voting rights, of course. And this was in keeping with Mr. Macron's statement that Serbia's full membership will be achieved, as he said during his visit to Serbia, which would be in accordance with the French strategy for the Western Balkans, where they announced the intention of the French administration to intensify its presence and more actively participate in all reforms in the Western Balkans and to assist both financially and technically and politically all these reforms. And I would conclude by welcoming this kind of information once again. Thank you. Thank you too. The next speaker is Mr. Rističević. Yes. A speech has to be short enough. It has to be interesting, but it has to be long enough to cover the topic at hand. So this is what I will try to do. I do not think, in contrast to some fellow MPs who often change their opinions, that the European Union is a globalist and banking evil. Since the 80s, I have liked the idea of united Europe, whatever we shall call it. We may call it. The trust of the citizens partly rests on the belief of the citizens of Europe that the European Union is the land of cocaine, that they will only be receiving salaries and benefits from the European Union once we join. But if you were to offer to me, will you give me 15 billion and without any conditions attached, and so we can raise salaries and pensions, etc. If you offer to me to choose between that option or to give me 15 billion, but for education and investments, especially in the food processing industry and agriculture, I would not choose the conditionless donation. I would choose the second option. But the majority of the citizens of Serbia do understand that the EU is not something which just invests and finances, etc. They do understand that you should get something when you do join the European. This involves a complicated administrative procedure, that is clear. We expect you to solve our problems despite the fact that you have your own problems. This is how it looks to me at this particular moment. Of course, I always have my personal view, which is different from that of others. It might seem strange to some here. The pharmacist here can help me. It seems to me at this moment that you are not quite clear about what to do with your own future, especially Mr. Macron, etc. But you should know, you should be able to know what to do with us. I cannot expect such assistance from you. What I would like to see is for all these Balkan countries who are lamenting so much and don't know how to reconcile among each other and want to be in the European Union, they want to be together. So once they are admitted to the EU, they will be there together. Why does not then the European Union support a Balkan Union, for instance? In the 90s, I proposed that Yugoslavia should resolve its problems, but all the states keeping what they want, but have a common market, a common customs union, and one currency and free circulation of people, services, and capital. So So you could tell us, have this Balkan Union, if you want to play these big games and big matches with the European Union, let us see you prepare yourselves to see whether you're mature enough. Let us have a testing period. The European Union is a collection of norms and standards, etc., but you could see whether you can meet all those regulation standards, etc., create a Balkan Union and initially have a common market, free circulation of capital, etc., and this will only raise your chances. Such a sort of economy would actually mean progress. I would like as many investments as possible to come to Serbia because that would diffuse tensions in Serbia and across the region. And in that case, all the countries here would have the opportunity or the motivation to actually suppress their aspirations to the effect if that mountain or if that field was mine, I could resolve all these problems. So I believe that this mountain complex, as I call it, could be resolved in these countries and with our neighbors if we were to establish such a union. If you wish to help the Serbian opposition with advice, I have nothing against. I am against the meddling of foreign media, fictitiously registered TVs in Luxembourg, and we have to let them work here freely. I don't believe that this is imposed on us by the EU, but by our businessmen here. But if you genuinely wish to help the opposition Serbia, I have nothing against advice, do so. But bear in mind that they actually became from the democratic parties and the voters of the Democratic Party. Believe me, because I cooperated with this party when it was under Zoran Đinđić, and this fragmentation of the voting of the constituency of the Democratic Party has resulted in their situation. They have so many problems. If you want to advise them, tell them to unite, that they should unite and work together, and because you can calculate yourself. At the next elections, they can perhaps altogether win 30% of the vote. But they will show the voters that they actually deserve some trust. They are only lamenting. They are enslaved as debtors. They buy deputies' clubs, they buy MPs, this is in quotation marks, of course, promise some money or some political future to people, and they manage to co-opt them. And the Democratic Party is now a debtor. It used to be an example of a good opposition party. It was not a light at the end of the tunnel, but it made it possible for all of us small parties to gather together. Now we have some 7 or 8 parties, and this is a major problem. There is this fear because they are so fragmentized. They fear the elections, and this fear actually drives them to some statements which are not normal in my view. If you wish to help them, tell them to unite. This is not in favor of the government, but I, being a member of a small party, see fit to recommend something of the kind. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one more participant. Yes, very briefly. Majority of the colleagues expressed the wonder or disagreement with the decision not to start the negotiations with North Macedonia. I must say I am not surprised. I was expected this decision from Europe. And I must say that this decision, to many who are on this road towards Europe, points out the fact that the Union wants the Union to be a society of people who respect the Constitution, respect the population, who has dignity. Northern Macedonia spat on its name, spat on the wish of their citizens, and one should not be surprised that Europe reacted the way it did. Thank you. Do we have anybody else who would like to take the floor? No? All right, we are already late. I would suggest we move on to the next point, accepting voting in all the amendments, recommendations. You have all the papers in front of you now. You want to say something? Compromise amendments, yes, please. And oral amendments. Thank you, Mrs. Fayon. Dear colleagues, very briefly, I would inform the members of the Joint Committee the draft text of the declaration agreed between the bureaus of our Joint Committee, the 16 paragraphs of the declaration. The two co-chairs considered all of them and the amendments, and I would like to inform you that we have agreement on 17 amendments. I will give you the numbers. You can find them in the papers. So, Amendments 1, submitted by Orlic. Amendment 2, submitted by Picula. Amendment 5, submitted by Bogovic. Amendment 8, second part, submitted by Stojkovic and Kovac. Amendment 9, submitted by Bogovic. Amendment 12, submitted by Bogovic. Amendment 14, Kokalis. Amendment 19, to vote separately, second part, proposal of Mrs. Kovac. Amendment 21, submitted by Madame Marjanovic, compromised. Amendment 24, submitted by Marjanovic. In proposed compromise, you can see it there, with the addition which we will read out. So in the complete version is accepted by both co-chairs. Amendment 27, Bogovic. Amendment 31, Arsis Tomic, as you can see it. 32, Bogovic. 33, Kokalis. 37, Orlic. 41, Bogovic. And 44, Mijatovic, which sums up to 17 amendments which we believe are acceptable, straight as they are, to members of both delegations. So I would ask also the members of the delegation from the Serbian National Assembly not to insist on the rest of the amendments, but to concentrate on the draft of our declaration, enriched by the amendments we agree on. I believe this text is a high-quality text which would satisfy both delegations, namely the entirety of our joint committee. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Orlic. My suggestion would be to vote on the compromised amendments, 17. So we would start with Amendment 1. Orlic, do I need to read out? I will not read out then. Amendment 1, do we vote it in? Acceptable to everybody. If no comments, all right, we carry on. The microphone went off. Amendment 2. Comments, all right, accepted. Amendment 5, Bogovic, comments. Acceptable. Amendment 8, compromised wording, second part. You have the text. Comments? No. Accepted. Amendment 9. Bogovic. Accepted. Amendment 12. Bogovic. Goes. Good. Amendment 14. Kokalis. Second part. And then 19, second part. Acceptable, okay. Then 21 by Mrs. Marjanovic. 24 again Marjanovic. We have the addition. First part is accepted. Then we have one more oral amendment. We agreed on it. Pozdravljamo plan da u narednom periodu nadzorno telo Skupštine za kontrolu štampanih i elektronskih medija tokom elektronske kampanje. Prihvatljivo. Acceptable, sorry. Excellent. And we have the amendment 27 submitted by Mr. Bogovic. Goes. Then 31 by Arsic and Tomic. We go for it. Then 32 Bogovic. Good. 33 by Kokalis. We accept it. And 37 by Orlic. We accept it. Yes. Good. 41 by Bogovic. Acceptable. Amendment 44 by Mijatovic. Again, acceptable. Good. Now we have to adopt the entirety of our joint declaration and recommendations. First, Serbian delegation votes, please. Acceptable. All for it, nobody against. Now, European Parliament, the four of us, all four of us are in favor. All right, we congratulate. This time the declaration was well voted in. Thank you all. And thank you for the excellent cooperation yesterday and today, and excellent debates. I can only say if there is any other business on the agenda, no, then next meeting, 12th meeting of our joint committee in Strasbourg in July, 8th and 9th of July. We, of course, wait for the final green light by the conferences of the presidents in the parliament. And now I would thank co-chair Orlic and all of you for hosting us here in the National Assembly in Belgrade. As usual, an exceptional experience. And my thanks go to the secretariat of the delegation, all of you who were with us, interpreters, of course, the media that followed. An applause for everybody. And I conclude this. If Mr. Orlic wants to say something, thank you very much. If not before, see you in Strasbourg. After the elections it will take place, so we expect all the best. Thank you once again. We are always genuine when we say it was a pleasure to meet you, this time again, to work together. And we managed to get an excellent text of our declaration, the best ever, I believe. It will be a great pleasure to meet you in Strasbourg, but we are always very impatient to be the host, so after Strasbourg I'm looking forward to Belgrade after that. Safe journey home.